Hey, 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez, and you're listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. Today is quite a special episode because for the first time in over 10 years, we're planning to have 3 of our team 3DMJ coaches competing in 2024. And in this episode that was recorded on the last day of November 2023, you're going to hear about each of their plans to get there. Coaches Brad Loomis, Brian Miner, and Alberto Nunez will spend this episode talking you through what they've done so far and what they plan to do in order to prepare for that 2024 season. Now you might be thinking, well, if they want to peak in fall of next year, which is so far away, why have they already done things to prepare for it? And if you've been following us for any amount of time, you know that we have this concept called prep positioning, which can also sometimes be described as the diet before the diet. Essentially, what this means is we spend well over a year considering how to best prepare our athletes to be in the most advantageous striking distance of their stage weight possible. Then we often have a holding phase or two, and then they start the actual shorter-term contest prep diet just a few months before their season starts. If this sounds like a lot, it kind of is if you've never heard about it or tried it before. But in this episode, we're definitely going to help clear it all up using these 3 guys' 1 to 2 year prep positioning examples to show you. They'll tell you about their upcoming contest schedules, what cleanup phases they've run in the last year, and how they plan to dial everything in when the stage time nears. And if you want a more detailed, systematic understanding of how these prep positioning phases work and how we run them a little more specifically, we have a video course called Prep Positioning at 3dmjvault.com. If you sign up to be a VIP subscriber, you'll get that course along with instant access to 21 other courses as soon as you sign up. Again, you can get all of our stuff in one bundle at one price at 3dmjvault.com. That's it for that. As always, if you have any feedback or comments on this particular episode, head on over to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/team3dmj and leave it under podcast number 245. Let's get into it. Here is 3 pro bodybuilders 1 year out with Brian Miner, Alberto Nunez, and Brad Loomis.
All right, gentlemen. So we are less than a year out from prospective shows. So we're probably up to something. We should be up to something. We should all be kind of in slightly different phases, but nevertheless getting ready to land this thing next year. Ourselves as well as like our athletes. That's usually what I was timing it by. I'm like, oh shoot, I know like this guy's doing that. I'm working with like some of the same shows that I am. I should probably start thinking about like what I'm going to do. But yeah, we're all up to something. So, I think the purpose of this podcast is going to be, it's not just like, hey, like start your prep when you're 20 weeks out or something. And it goes a little deeper than that. So I'm going to start with Brad, simply because I think he's probably the most anticipated prep this upcoming year, because it's going to be a decade, if I remember correctly. So that's 10 years. So Brad, like, what are you doing to facilitate this 10-year comeback? Like, you're like the George Foreman of natural bodybuilding at this point, because
yes,
that's
yes,
a decade,
indeed.
dude.
In fact, the last time that I was on stage was standing up next to you when the WNBF was making their comeback. So indeed, it will be right short of 10 years. So I think things have been going good. I mean, I'm kind of pre-prep positioning. I got the blessing from Jeff and from Eric when they saw me at Battle of the Bay. They said that yes, indeed, that my physique has improved slightly. My lats are a little bit bigger, and I'm hopeful, put it that way. So where am I right now? I was walking around low, well, let's say mid 190s. I've dieted down to high. I got all the way down to 172, but I'm now diet breaking and have been for probably 2 months, and I'm walking around low 180s, high 170s, and trying to make those last second body part improvements that we always talk about during the diet break, right? So hammering the side delts and trying to make a little bit of improvement there, and just cruising right now. But we'll turn up the volume just a little bit and get a little bit more serious, probably after the holidays.
Okay. So ideally, when would you start your prep, you think?
I'll probably start it when everybody else starts it, like January 2nd, with all the New Year's resolutions.
All right, January, and then you would probably start it similar to this body weight, maybe seeing a few more 180s and 170s at that point, I imagine, post-holiday blizzard. And you plan to be active mostly during the summer, right?
Yeah. I'm gonna probably hit the late spring, kind of summer shows. Maybe even squeeze a powerlifting meet in there. Maybe we'll see. I got some excitement for some powerlifting meets that are out there. But yeah, I will not extend the off season, or excuse me, extend the competition season into the late summer and the fall shows. I think that who knows? We'll see. But that's not my plan right now. My plan is late spring and early summer.
Okay. And, I know this whole setting up the diet the way we try to encourage our athletes to do these days isn't something that we've been all universally doing for I guess that long when you think about it. So is this the first time you're going to go in with a setup that is similar to this?
Yeah. I'm going into this with the prep positioning mindset, right? With actually having a long-term plan, and this month we're doing this, and this 3 months we're doing this, and this month we're doing this. And we've all set that kind of a timeline up for all of our clients many, many, many times, but this will be the first time for me. And I'm very visual. I'm a very visual, kind of structured, goal-oriented person. And so I'm kind of excited to kind of set this up for myself on the same tables and charts and graphs that I use for everybody else. So yeah, it'll be fun at the same time that I'll be, kind of somewhat suffering at certain points.
All right. And that you got what's your magic number?
The magic number as far as body weight goes, is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
So it'll be probably what I usually do. I'll dip down into the 150s, high 159, maybe an average of 159. And then we'll just kind of see what things look like from there. Because I haven't been that body weight in, like we talked about, a decade. So we'll see what things look like as I'm getting down there. I'm looking to set a PR for being in my 50s, right? I'm not necessarily looking for a PR as far as lifetime goes. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there, but we'll have everything set up as far as little landmarks and timelines as we go that way.
What shows?
I don't really have one, to be honest with you, Alberto. Yeah, I don't really have any picked out per se. We'll find out when I get there.
All right, Mr. Loomis, you're off the hot seat. Ryan.
Yes.
What's up with you, man?
I am currently, I've been dieting for a bit. So I'm currently 209-ish. And, kind of that magic range, 10 to 12% over would probably be low to mid 190s roughly. So my plan is to get down there probably by I have a couple scenarios here, near the end of February, and then hold for 8 weeks or so, and then start prep at that point. So the first show that I'd like to kind of consolidate the season a little bit. So I want to go the WNBF route, which I'm not a pro in the WNBF, so I'm going to have to put myself in a position to do a couple shows, in the fall, hopefully qualify. The ultimate goal is WNBF Worlds, but I'd like to like 2017, so it's been 7 years for me. I was ready, I think, mid-September, and then through the end of November. So basically like 6-ish weeks, or I'm sorry, like 10 weeks about. This time I'd like to kind of keep it compressed a little bit more, see if we can get away with that, just kind of October, November. So looking at pro qualifiers in that range. But I'm trying to, get down there. I have a couple different kind of scenarios of how I'm going to go about this. I have a couple trips planned in the spring, which, I mean, they're pretty short, so it shouldn't be too disruptive, but kind of assuming those will be somewhat holding patterns for a couple weeks and then get back to it. But, I'd like to start prep mid 190s. So still have a little ways to go. But it's, now that I've kind of got things dialed in, it's been pretty smooth so far. But yeah, that's basically it. Just kind of cruising, slow and steady. The holidays are usually like, I won't be taking the whole month off from dieting or anything like that, but give myself some leeway, before and after Christmas. But besides that, I plan to be dieting for, the next 3.5 weeks at least, and then probably after that as well. So yeah, I'm excited for it though. It's been too long, but I hoping to be improved from last time. I think I will be. And yeah, it's motivating because I think, we've talked about this before, just the organization that you're forced to have during prep, it's got those residual benefits, outside of that in terms of just time management. And I think that's one thing I benefit a lot from actually with prep. Not that that's an excuse to prep, but nice side effect for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about your situation, Bert? I know you have a unique couple big events upcoming to work around.
Yeah. Well, like you guys, it's a similar model. It's like typically off season, I think my best fighting weight is going to be like 180 to 190, and like I will run like gaining and cutting cycles like between those two ranges, and just keep doing that, like rinse and repeat. But then you get to the point where it's like, oh shoot, like think I'm prep, and I don't want to start my prep at 190 either. So similar to you guys, like it's like I'm in a cutting phase. I think a few weeks in now. And so yeah, I think I topped out at about like 182 like this off season. That was the heaviest. And a lot of it's just because it was a shorter off season. I competed last year, so it gives you so much time to like basically like decondition yourself. I'm 175 now as I'm positioning myself for prep, but I plan to keep going until, what you mentioned, Brian, till my baby is here. And then I'll hold it from that point onwards. So ETA on that is somewhere like late January. Today's the last day of November. So I have from here until then to just keep taking some off. I've been decently assertive, and that's just because I'd like to be in the high 160s. Like I'd like to be at some point in January, like honestly, like 8 to 9 pounds off, and then start eating, like recover from that diet. There shouldn't be too much to recover from, but again, we have that like bridging period with the way we position folks for prep. Now I'll be doing that until like May. So even though I might touch like 167, 168, 169, something like that, I think by May, I'll probably be like low 170s, like probably 5 pounds heavier than that. And that's a pretty good place to start prep. So yeah, I'm getting myself maybe a little bit closer than the last two preps for sure. But I think I'm going to need that just because I don't know what I'm in for. And as of right now, I'm like, hey, I'm going to prep. But that might not be the right thing. But if it might be, I want to put myself in a position where, like, I won't be chasing anything. because that is the point to like positioning yourself. It's like you want to get yourself to the point where it's somewhere like best case, and this is probably more reserved for people who are well versed, and then like individual set points as well. But like 8% is probably like the lowest we like to play with, where you're 8% above your stage weight when you start a prep, somewhere around there. And then the higher end is going to be like 12. I'm getting closer to that 8, but that's just because, you know, somewhere between 8 to 12% of your body weight to go, and you add a 24-week prep to that, you don't feel like you're chasing anything. You're kind of just letting the wonders of time do their thing. So that's why we emphasize this so much, because we've both done it different ways. I think we've all had preps where I think my PR is like 40 pounds, and whoa, that is an adventure. You know, you can get away with a lot the first half, but you know, that second half of the diet, you feel it. Like you can tell that, you know, you've been trekking for a while. And that's why we think the setup is so important, because, you know, you get the easy fat loss out of the way, like Brad is doing. You get to look at the physique in a more transparent state, and you're like, okay, you know, maybe during these last few months as I try to regenerate some of that health back from the fat loss. Again, it shouldn't be too much because it's all easy fat loss, but nevertheless, there's a few things to regenerate after any fat loss phase. While you're doing that, it gives you a chance to like, hey, let me run, I don't know, something that specializes like in the arms, you know, quads, like whatever it might be. Because you know how it goes, as you become more advanced, for sure, by the time you are competing, sometimes you have to wait a little bit longer to confirm that you've made the improvements that, you know, you thought you made. So, when we're done with like this, like, hey, chop off the easy fat off the physiques, that bridging phase, it does serve two purposes. It's like, okay, let's bring everything back up to speed, like hormonally from a health perspective. But it gives us a chance to, okay, like really see more or less what we're working with, and maybe run some things that are a bit more specialized to, you know, what we feel like we might be lacking at that point.
How long, just so I guess listeners can get an idea, how long do you recommend these bridging phases last?
Ideally, I like 12 weeks. I think 12 weeks is good. 8, sometimes we just have to work with that. Like that's just what we have. And then if you go further than that, for some people, it's just kind of a really hard ask, like to hold, right? But if someone's really experienced, like for example, I've done this a few times now. Like I'm basically not going to be dieting from late January until like mid-May, and I don't see myself putting on more than like 3 to 4 pounds, because at this point, generating a like lean bulk per like the leanest side of that spectrum, like it's kind of an easy thing, but for some folks, it might not be. So yeah, 12 weeks I think is about right for most, at least.
Brad, how long are you running your break? Because you're dieting right now, correct? Or you're in the middle of holding?
No, I'm kind of in the middle of holding. Because I was planning on going until the end of the year to diet, and then have kind of a shorter break. You know, about like just through the holidays, basically, just kind of January and December and January. But life kind of got in the way, you know, and things got a little bit chaotic on the personal side, and so I had to kind of basically bump that whole period kind of forward and then extend it, you know, just a little bit. So it's going to end up being about kind of where Berto kind of recommended. It'll probably end up being about 12, maybe 14 weeks, that it'll kind of be that kind of little holding period. But my holding periods are most people's dieting. You know, I have to kind of keep the constraints on the nutrition just a little bit. I don't move a whole lot. And so what my holding patterns look like was probably going to look like dieting, you know, kind of for some people. But it'll be easy to turn that volume up. You know, all I have to do is I kind of find out real quick when I was chasing around all those 14-year-olds, you know, doing all the football coaching in September. As soon as I get my steps up and I start moving around, the weight just kind of starts falling off pretty darn quickly. Brad's a little more fragile, I start kind of straining my groin and straining my quad, and I got to make sure that I'm not doing too much intense activity. But it comes off pretty quick, when that happens. And so then easily I can just kind of keep doing what I'm doing, pick up that activity a little bit. I'm going to probably kind of be a little bit of a guinea pig on myself. I'll kind of do these kind of almost kind of like stop and go. I'll dig hard for stretches, diet break for a little bit, dig hard for stretches, diet break a little bit unconventional from what I usually do with folks. But I think that I'll be able to hold up better. And like I said, I'll be my own guinea pig, my own science project, and we'll see how it goes. But I've got it all just kind of laid out, and I'll just, like Burrow said at the very beginning, I'll let the wonders of time do their thing.
Nice. So, again, like we're doing this because we've all done it a different way, right? Like your last prep, Brian, in many ways, it was just, maybe we held you a little bit too long, but to be honest, I don't think it's going to feel quite the same, because every time you go there, it's like you brace for the worst, and then you're like, oh, it wasn't nearly as bad this time, right? You just get better at it with every time. So last time, I remember your prep, I'm like, wow, this is like beautifully executed. Like I remember just ramping up food to the point where, like, boy, it was high, like on a per pound basis, your caloric intake. So I'm like, man, it wasn't easy, but on paper and from my perspective, it looked easier than most preps. You've got it other ways too, right? You've also lost big chunks of weight.
I mean,
before,
I think every prep I've started, each prep that I've done, I've started lighter. So I've done 3, and the first one, I have you beat on your PR. I was at 50 pounds in 20 weeks. So it was exactly 233 to 183, which was, that sucked, but it was almost nice because I had no other basis of comparison. So I'm like, this is just what it is, So any other more streamlined approach has just felt easy compared to that, which I think it has some advantages. But, and then 2012, I think I started around 207, competed, like 178, and then 2017, 193, competed at 178. I don't know if my stage weight will be up at all. I want to just keep pushing condition. I was pretty happy with how it came out last time, but I think it's safe to always plan when you're establishing a timeline, plan on weighing the same or less if you have improvements to make on the conditioning front. So this time, part of the reason, with kind of compressing it a bit is just I'm heavier now at this point in the year than I was like 2016 heading into 2017 by probably like 8 pounds or so. So I'm trying to, just give myself a longer timeline. So that kind of compresses the back end of the season. And it's just nice not, like, it was pretty manageable last time, but I think this, now that I kind of know what to expect, it shouldn't be an issue getting it done in that time frame. Mid 190s again is the goal to start. And then, if I can be 180, great, but, might be even lighter than that.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's, I guess a lot of people look at this like whole setup fiasco and they're like, oh, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of like up and down to be doing, when a prep itself is pretty damn hard. But I mean, I know I can speak for myself. Like it's a lot easier this way when, again, you have 10, 12% of your body weight to go. You have 24 weeks. It's like the numbers are just on your side, like 100%.
I think one thing when people,
you've lost. I mean, you got to, it was 183
season 1. Yeah.
No, but like, okay, so you didn't get as lean as like you do now, but like losing 50 pounds at once.
It was a lot.
That takes its toll.
I mean, especially, I'm actually impressed how much muscle I maintained for that show. I mean, I lost more than I should have, but yeah, when you kind of put it out to, percent per week, like I was, well over 1% for the majority of that time. And I think one thing, and I had a call this morning with a gentleman getting ready to prep, and he, first-time competitor, and I think a lot of first-time competitors make the mistake of, it's like they accelerate into the show. They've maybe didn't give themselves an ample timeline, and the rate of loss, they find they're having to increase it in order to, reach the finish line by the time they, want to compete. And oftentimes they compete and still wish they would have been leaner. And really, the rate of loss should be going down, or trending down. And some of that's just related to maintaining muscle as you get leaner, having the magnitude of deficit smaller. And the other thing is, just it naturally tends to do that just with the adaptive, aspects of metabolism as you continue to get leaner. So yeah, it should be like a smooth landing where, your deficit might only be a couple hundred calories a day. And, with that intentional slowing of the rate, I think another thing to keep in mind is like compliance becomes even more important at the end of a prep, I think, for people, when the wiggle room, the margin of error could either bring you back to maintenance or even into a surplus potentially. So it's sort of like it's rather than just coming out of the gate swinging, with meal plans and just being very militant, it's just sort of this gradual increase in kind of dialing things in. And I think that conserves energy. I think that's an aspect that's not talked about enough, is just that conservation of effort across a year and knowing when to recharge, because, bodybuilders in general are, they are usually willing to endure quite a bit. And so, but I think it's not as much as maybe they give themselves credit for. It's not as much as, we're not as tough as we think we are. So it's easy to just get there and, in one giant cut, like it's, well, not easy, but it's easiest on paper, and it just seems like it's less work. But when you start breaking it up, you kind of recharge your willpower a bit. And I think from, we've talked about this before, from a physique assessment perspective, the utility of refeeds and diet breaks as you go, at the start of a diet, like where I'm at now, if I were to do a refeed, like it's mostly just for social flexibility at that point. If we're going out to dinner or whatever, whereas later in prep, filling out, you can kind of start to inform yourself with data on how you were going to peak, and I think that's some people have written off the utility of refeeds there. But I think, the metabolic reasons aren't why we generally include them. It's, boost performance, mental refresh, and just allow us to last as long as it takes in order to get shredded. And I think that's, most people, the planning process is where I think 90% of competitors that are unhappy with how they looked, that's where things went wrong. It's not necessarily the X's and O's during the prep that they should do differently. It's just give themselves an ample timeline so they don't run out of runway before, they, figure it out. So, but, and then the other thing too is, you'll see people on social media post something like, I've been prepping or dieting for 62 weeks or something like that. And it's sort of frustrating because, yeah, maybe the goal has been like progressively getting leaner that entire time, but when you kind of map out like the periods of diet breaks, if you have refeeds each week, and I did this for my last prep, and I think from when I started my initial fat loss, like the pre-prep diet to, through my last show, I think about 2/3 of it was maybe a deficit, or no, I think it was like even like 60% was a deficit and 40% of the time was spent at maintenance or eating, into the show. So it's, even though the goal, like the overarching theme is fat loss, there's still a lot of periods of maintaining there. And it doesn't sound it sounds much more abrasive when you just lists the total time, but it doesn't really tell the full story.
Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez popping in real quick to tell you all about our latest video course in the 3DMJ Vault called The Default Diet. It's a 30-minute deep dive into the art and skill of macronutrient manipulation and dietary structure for competitive bodybuilders. The unfortunate truth is that most physique athletes start their first contest prep by overhauling their entire lifestyle and being overly restrictive for months on end, only to do the complete opposite during their off-season and lose all sense of structure. It's not because they don't have discipline, it's because they don't have a plan and a system to default to. This causes erratic food behaviors, huge swings in their energy intake, and less than ideal performance in the gym. For some, these peaks and valleys might even be the reason they overshoot their productive off-season body weights and make subsequent contest preps even more difficult and longer than they need to be. So, what Eric Helms teaches you here in this course will hopefully solve a lot of those issues for you. He'll show you how to create a productive spectrum of intakes for yourself that will guide you into and out of contest prep seasons for as long as you'd like to keep competing. And he does this by creating and reviewing 2 example diets using 2 athlete avatars. One for smaller individuals who might hit their deepest prep intake around 1,200 calories, and another example for larger humans with contest prep low days around 1,800 calories. And after you've approached your nutrition habits in this manner long enough, you'll likely find that even if you ever stop competing, the off-season structure he covers will continue to serve you as a guidepost for how to create healthy and productive eating habits for any active adult looking to gain and maintain muscle mass for the long haul. The Default Diet is now the 22nd course in the 3DMJ Vault, which is our online learning platform of organized video-based education for serious lifters. You can become a VIP member and get access to every single one of those courses for just $25 per month or $85 per year. This means that once you complete this long-term nutrition course for competitors, you'll also have access to all of our advanced training courses as well, like bodybuilding program design, the lagging body parts course, the lifting library, and so much more. Head on over to 3dmjvault.com and sign yourself up today. That's 3dmjvault.com to get all access. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the rest of the show.
You eloquently and perfectly verbalize why I'm kind of setting mine up the way that I am. Because, I could on paper say that I've been dieting since July, right? But this whole last time period has been, kind of pretty easy, really. I don't know if I've been in a surplus, but all those aches and pains and those little strains, I found out I'm pretty resilient. I can overcome those pretty quickly. Now, when I say pretty quickly, I'm talking about, about 3 or 4 weeks. But nonetheless, I can kind of get a little bit fragile, back off volume a little bit on training, and then kind of rebuild and recoup in a pretty short period of time, really. And so I kind of feel like I can do exactly kind of periodize it the way that you outlined there. Brian, is push hard, get the activity up, maybe be in a little bit of a deeper deficit, maybe push that 1% of body weight, lost every single week. Let the wonders of time do their magic work. Run that for about 8 or 10 weeks and then kind of back things off for 2 or 3 weeks and then put the gas pedal down again. Because if I do end up getting a little bit run down at the end of that 10-week period, I found out through experience that if I back off just a little bit, increase the food a little bit, bring the training volume down just a little bit, I can regenerate pretty darn quickly. And then I can, continue on. Like you said, I've conserved that energy just a little bit. And I think it'll make it a teensy bit, it'll be easier to endure. Because like we talked about before, Brian, both of us kind of emptied the tank in our last preps to the point to where it's like, I'm good. I don't need to prep or do this for a really long time. In your case, 7 years. In my case, a decade, right?
Yeah.
I think I can avoid that this time and pick my shots. and leave a little bit in the tank such that I don't end up hating prepping and ward it off for the rest of my life.
It's definitely going to be easier.
Well, the goal is not to empty the tank. Like I think that's the assumption. Like you if anything, you try to conserve energy so that when you do get to that final leg of the prep, where you are like scratching, crawling for like fat loss at that point, that you have a little kick in you. Like that's important. Like how you arrive to that point where you're 2-3% away from stage where you're like, those are the that 2-3% are some of the most memorable pounds you will lose.
Yeah, I think in my case, starting the season a little bit later, we talked about, I think all of us talked about it at Worlds when we were up there, but I talked to a number of competitors who were excited to be there, the social aspect, but they're like, I want to do it and get on with my off season, and it's like the biggest show of their, bodybuilding career, and they're, just checking, mentally they're just getting through it. They're not as excited about it. And I think as a season goes on and you compete more and more, like each additional show kind of can start to have that feeling. And you want to kind of peak your motivation when it matters most. And I think, it is possible to spread a season out too far for some people. I think with me, it was, emptying the tank there. Like I felt like conditioning I was very happy with it. And I didn't feel the urge to prep again to improve that. Whereas like my first show in 2010, it was like, okay, I want to prep again because now I know how to get leaner. Now I want to exhaust that avenue. Whereas 2017, like I don't think I exhausted the avenue of conditioning, but I felt like I was happy with it. And I knew like, okay, I don't think this is the limiting factor for me doing, placing better in these shows and improving. I think it's like putting on more size, the development side. So it felt like, earning your off season in a way in that regard.
Do you guys plan on competing more often now that we're all a little more seasoned?
Yeah, I know I do. Because my last prep in 2014, I want to say that was my only show that I did, was with you, Berto, at that return of the WNBF under Bob and Tina and Nancy Andrews. And it kind of left me, while I emptied the tank out, it kind of left me wanting just a little bit. It's like, man, I kind of worked hard to get here, and why didn't I didn't try for another show or two. However, at the time I was reflecting back, it was like, you know what, I'm done with this bodybuilding thing for a little while. I kind of want to do this powerlifting thing, and I don't think I can make the two worlds coexist in the same body, not only physically but just mentally. I just was like, I was kind of ready to just kind of be done with that and really dive into something that seemed, at the time very new, different, and exciting. And I got a lot of good fulfillment out of that, a lot of good years. And also at the same time competed at my lightest body weight ever in powerlifting. But yeah, this time I'll be hitting, more than one show. Exactly what my shows are, like I said, we're going to kind of leave it an open-ended prep, because I do want to see how things go and push hard, back it off, assess a little bit, push hard, back it off, assess a little bit. And then I'll be able to kind of take advantage of things that I might learn, from earlier shows, and then apply those to later shows, like Brian talked about with peaking. And it's so cool with our clients to play around with refeeds. What does so-and-so look like after one refeed, after two refeeds, one big refeed, a small refeed, and a big refeed. I kind of want to play with that too, as I'm kind of, trialing and erroring things. And I'm not going to do, my goal is just to kind of hit some small shows and get my get my feet wet again, get up on stage again. I really want to work on my posing. I really want to work on improving my posing. So I'll be visiting Jeff quite a bit, but that's a perfect time to kind of do those things, push hard, dial it back a little bit, get some refeeds in there, see what things look like, assess, finish that little diet break, go back at it again. That's kind of how I plan on doing things as I'm hitting multiple shows.
Yeah, I don't know. I was just going to say, I don't know if I'll do the frequent thing or not. We'll take it one show at a time or one year at a time. I mean, multiple shows next year, but I don't think I'll ever be like a Marshall Johnson competing every year. I think Berto, I know you're more inclined to do that, I think, than I am, but I think part of it honestly is just getting older, and like just right now with 2 kids, like consistent training, is like that's a chore. Well, not a chore, but it's like I have to manage my time to make sure I get everything in. So it's a sacrifice, to some degree with everybody involved. So I just want to make sure that if I went that route, competing more frequently, it would probably be once the kids are a little bit older. But yeah, I haven't thought that far ahead.
Well, part of my reason for maybe doing it is, the nice, like, shiny blood work that you get. I get that sweet spot, like not when you're totally emaciated, but like things are running great when you're like 10, 12 pounds over stage weight. And if you're just kind of hovering around there, it's like, hey, might add like 3 or 5 years, right? So that part's kind of a nice little bonus. So, good excuse.
Just start doing NPC shows, and then you don't have to diet at all.
Right. That's an option. How about this, guys? Like I know when I years that I'm not competing, like I run experiments or just new methods with my athletes. And like, for example, like the recovery diet, once we kind of standardized things there a little bit, I remember in 14, like this was 3 preps ago. So I did 14, 17, 22. I remember I did reverse out, but I was getting to that point. I'm like, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's like I'm waiting 6 months to actually feel like I can progress like in the gym. So, we started running that with athletes, and I'm like, whoa, this is pretty cool. Like they're like, they're complaining like week 3 and 4, but then like 2 months later, they're like, I'm so glad you got me out of there. Like this was a terrific call. And then the same thing with like the multiple day refeeds. Like, we've been on podcasts, you and I, Brian, like debating like the utility in them. And, we have found them to work very well for our athletes. So same thing there. I remember 17 was like my first shot to like formally like give those a try. Are there any things that you guys have been toying around with your athletes that you're like, ooh, this might be a good idea, when it comes to my own prep?
I think one thing that I've used with a couple people is just having, if there's a couple days that are just very easy for somebody where maybe they're not training, or it's a very, like having one day that's quite a bit lower calorically than some of the others, that's an easy buffer, to strip some fat loss off, and then, allows them to eat a little bit more on the other days. Sometimes if I do like 2 consecutive refeeds, maybe the first day back being somewhat more assertive in terms of the deficit. Because usually you'll still feel fine at that point, or, you'll feel at least more intact than you would be 5 days deep into the low days. But, but for the most part, like I'm still using like the multi-day refeeds, similar to how we did. But yeah, maybe occasionally just having like some non-linear low days where, there's some variability there depending on the workload, their schedule, and things like that.
Brett? I've kind of found out that I'm traditionally too conservative with peaking, and I'm excited on myself to try out things that are a little bit more aggressive. I had a really interesting peak, actually multiple peaks for a gentleman that I worked with this year. Have you guys ever like wanted to have somebody after their show like track every macro and every calorie of everything they ate? Because we always hear that amazing look the day after the show, right? When we went out to eat and we ate, the big Mexican meal. We had Cold Stone Creamery and all these goodies after the show, and then the next day they talk about how they look amazing. And I actually had a client this year that did that very same thing, but he tracked meticulously everything that he ate. He dissected his cheeseburger and weighed everything and then put it back together again. And every peak that we did, we got more aggressive and more aggressive. And really, to be honest with you, the last peak, I was nervous because we were really aggressive. Fat, in the hundreds, and carbs, between the 5s and the 6s. And I was amazed with what I saw. I was really amazed because we had this great data. He tracked everything after his show when he had all of his good treats and everything. And we used all of that data to dial in our peaks, and we got better and better and better with every single show. And I've seen it a little bit with folks when they kind of fall off the wagon a little bit and they go over they have their emotional episodes with eating, right? And I found out that there's a little bit more to get away with there than I had previously thought. I mean, even with myself, I've only seen myself like really truly spilled one time, and that was when I basically ate 10,000 calories and 222 grams of fat from cookies. Maybe there's a little bit of middle ground in there between where I traditionally kind of peak and that extreme. And I'm kind of excited to kind of play around with that a little bit. Hence why I kind of want to, trial things just a little bit.
I think one I want to play with is especially athletes that I've I trust their intuition a little bit more. They're more experienced, like their instincts or gut feelings about things. Like our caloric ranges can be quite broad. So for example, with like Dirk, I think towards the end to get him in this like best shape, calories were, it's like, oh, you got anywhere from like, this would freak out most preppers because, they think the numbers we spit out are just like, they're golden. Like that is the magic number basically, but we're not that good. It's a rough estimate. Like this seems appropriate given everything we know, but it was around, I think 1,400 to 1,700 calories. And it was like, Dirk, you roll with the day, like, take into consideration your training status, what, like not just recovery, but what you have that day, like how's the day in regards to personal stress, your hunger, your levels of flatness, all this. And then based off that, you decide, like, is it a 1,400 calorie day or is it a 1,700 calorie day? And I think you can get athletes to, and this is the comparison I made for him, is like, have you ever been in one of those spin classes where the instructor's just like, you have to follow him, and it's like playing defense in any sport. It's like you're kind of a step behind all the time. So it's like it's rougher than like you kind of just doing some sort of interval-y training like at your own pace, right? Like usually you can get more out of yourself when you're kind of the one in control of the situation. You feel like you have some autonomy there. So I've noticed it with athletes when you give them the ability to, when we're digging especially, to like dig, but then there's like dig extra hard, they're able to get a whole lot more out of themselves because they get to decide. It's one of those things where it just feels, you feel less trapped. Like, there's many levels to restriction, right? And having a range, like it gets the best out of people is what I've noticed. Like he would usually call the shots like somewhere in the evening, I guess, and be like, hey, you know what? I think today could be a 1,400 calorie day. Let's roll with it. But sometimes I'm sure it's the other way where like you wake up and you're like, I'm 1,400 calorie good. And then the day takes its toll and you're like, you know what, I'm probably going to need a few extra 100 calories. So I think I'd like to expose myself or give myself the option to dig to places that I've never dug to before. And again, it's like you just kind of roll with the day, see what kind of day it is, and be like, yo, like, babe, today, don't cook me a potato. We're doing just steak, and we're calling it a day. So I think, expanding things even more so for myself when it comes to that digging period. Because when you see a lot of the guys that have really pushed their conditioning to that new level, like I remember with Brett Freeman, like he was always a guy that his, doesn't always reflect on calories, but his carbohydrate intake would always be somewhere like in the low to mid 200s. And, he gets striated glutes off that. And then, he worked with Cliff, and Cliff challenged him and really pushed him into like that point where he was like sub 100 at times on certain days of the week. And that got him to that next level. So, I guess I just want to expose myself to the elements, like for sure this go around, to make it really worth my time. But I want to do that with like some sort of nice buffer so that I can kind of pace it and strike when I want to, because it's worked really well with certain athletes. It's like, hey, you could do 50 grams of carbs or you could do 100. Totally up to you. And they not only push themselves better, but since it's self-inflicted as opposed to like me, like over here with a whip, they just don't look nearly as beat up because, they have control over the situation.
No, I like that a lot. And, I use ranges quite a bit with my athletes, and, the magnitude of the range can, depend on the situation, but I do like the idea of, if I happen to have a day during prep where I'm not as hungry, or maybe I'm not training, it's like if I'm not going to be playing like macro Tetris at the end of the day, getting up to the numbers that are assigned to me. So I think that's, from a behavioral perspective, I think that's a great way to go about it. Not to mention, all of the benefits you discussed, but it educates them on like how nutrition and energy balance, how that all kind of works, rather than, these three magical numbers that you're hitting at the end of the day, even if you're not hungry, or say you're ravenously hungry, had a high volume leg day, and you feel like, oh, I could probably benefit from an extra 50 carbs, but feel guilty doing it.
Yep.
It's just that autonomy. I think there's people that aren't 100%. They don't feel 100% ready for that, but once you give them that option, I think it organizes for them, and within a month, most of them are pretty happy with that approach.
I was just going to say I might do it without a body weight scale, just for fun.
That'd be interesting.
The only thing that's like, it's kind of like I have like all those people who are addicted to MyFitnessPal and it has the streak.
Ew.
Like that's the only thing that will look at. It's like, but like, how am I going to compare 163 last time to 163 this time? So I'm considering that, just because I do think it can be a distraction at times, and you do enough of these things, like, what lines should be in at this point and that point. And so considering it, we'll see. That one's hard to let go just because the data, right?
Just have Cynthia look at it. You don't have to look at it. She can record it for you.
Sure, she'll love that gig.
That's one thing I learned in my little prep positioning diet, is I learned what was kind of appropriately hungry. I knew how hungry that I needed to be in order to keep the scale kind of moving downwards slowly. But then I also kind of knew, okay, well, you know what? This is too hungry at this point. I need to, like you said, Alberto, I need to have a few extra 100 calories, or I need to kind of squeeze in a little extra meal here or there. And that's kind of something that I've never really utilized before. And I am probably gonna, I don't know if I'll do that the whole prep, but I'm definitely gonna do that in January when I kind of start easing back in and, like I said, turning that volume up, right? I'm gonna kind of use that feeling of being appropriately hungry and being, I guess, even appropriately fatigued, right? to where you're not trashed and you literally feel like you just got, beat up. But at the same time, just know that, okay, this is normal. This is how I should feel. And then likewise, you use those intuitive signals when it's kind of like, okay, you know what? I've beat myself up here long enough. I've been fatigued long enough. Now I can kind of bring things up a little bit and not be quite so fatigued. And then, kind of live there for a little while when I know that I'm ready to kind of start digging again. So I'll probably at some point have to kind of, like Brian said, go to the magic 3 numbers or go to the meal plan or whatever. But I'm sure not going to do that coming out of the gate. I'm gonna kind of start using these new kind of intuitive signals that I learned during the prep positioning phase, with not only hunger and being hungry and being appropriately hungry and then appropriately satisfied, but then also just how my body feels normally under normal circumstances, but then also in training as well.
Yeah, that's like dieting for prep. It's almost like an art form when you get it to that point where you're so in tune with what you require. And yeah, I don't think the message here is, for everybody to take that approach, but yeah, I think people should challenge themselves when it comes to their hunger cues, and being able to trust those a little bit, distinguishing between, am I hungry or am I just craving something right now? And you're going to be hungry. Like there's going to be genuine hunger there that you have to wait out. I think that's just where staying busy makes a big difference. My first prep, I like basically waiting around for my next meal, whereas now it's like I might forget to eat, and it's like, oh shit, like it's been 6 hours since I had any protein, and I'm not saying that's optimal, but you want to get to it. I'm glad I'm to that point now, where I'm not focused on like eating at a set time every single day. It's more flexible.
Yeah, speaking of which, like first person I kind of give that autonomy to, his name was Dean Lester. He probably listens to this one, so give him some shout outs, because the calories were so low that I guess where the 50 gram of carb thing came up in my mind. It's like, oh my God, you assigned yourself 50 grams of carbs. And I was like, bro, had I assigned you that, like that would have been absorbed very, very differently. So yeah, I think it's in your best interest to be able to gather that sort of information and like be able to relay it over to your coach, because I think sometimes the athletes expect that, like, all we want on our side is like toughness and grit, but it's better to, I'd much rather know that like you're kind of fading away here. You don't know if you can make it. You've been this close to just like emptying out like the cabinets, like that sort of stuff is really important. It doesn't mean we're going to throw in the towel. It just means like, okay, perhaps we have to make some changes to our base structure. And I know for myself, like the more I've been able to sympathize with like how I'm feeling, the more I've been able to, get at it myself. I think people do that very naturally with like the loads they're going to lift at the gym. Like they're totally okay with like, hey, today I'm not going to hit my usual weights. I'm just going to have to bring it down a notch, and that's fine. And they see the rhyme and the reason for that. But when it comes to, starving yourself over the course of a contest prep, that hits people in the ego a little bit. All right, gents. So this is class of 2024 here. Any advice you'd like to dispense to folks who are going to be joining us next year, who we might run into at some stage somewhere? Words of wisdom between all of us. We have quite a bit of experience with ourselves, with our athletes. Any things you'd like to leave for these folks?
I think if you're not already planning your timeline, like you might already be behind a little bit. And most people, what would you say? Like probably 90% of people are coming down from above 10 to 12%. You know, they're above that when they embark on the initial pre-fat loss. So that should be right now for most people, you know, regardless kind of if they're doing spring or fall shows. Like there should be likely be some fat loss that's about to occur, already occurring, if you want to do it kind of how we recommend.
Radley?
I mean, nothing comes to mind. I've got my little handy dandy list here of things that I wanted to talk about, and they're all crossed off. But yeah, I mean, I think you should be a little bit excited. I don't think you should go into this dreading anything. And me on my end, I'm a little bit on the excited side. I'm eager to be a little bit hungry. Like Brian said, when you're prepping, you know what you're signing up for. And so I'm eager to be a little bit on the hungry side.
Definitely.
And I'm just excited to, I don't know, you get lost in the work because it's one of those things that it never stops really, right? You know, it's not just the training, you have to do all these other things. And I don't know, I'm looking forward to that, to the, like already, like eating more fruits and vegetables, like during this cut. I'm like, wow, I take like really like damn good care of myself when I'm not trying to overconsume foods. So that's been nice. So yeah, like I think more than ever, you know, like Jeff, like he's 52 now. I remember when he was younger than me and competing, and you only have so many of these. So, and I'm realizing that now. So it's like, man, like I'm gonna enjoy everything about it as much as I can, because on the other side of it, there's days where you miss like your legs being heavy. You know, all the things that, you know, fighting through a day where you got some poor sleep and somehow making it happen. Yeah, I look forward to just being in the moment more for those things, and because before you know it, like that might be your last prep. So yeah, that's probably my number one expectation I have for myself next year is just to enjoy all of it and just really acknowledge the fact that, like, dude, you ain't gonna be doing this forever. So just enjoy it.
Agreed.
All right, guys. Yeah. Well, we need to get back to our diets, our protein, and hopefully we'll see a few of you guys maybe not on the stage, but backstage somewhere, maybe on the stage. But hopefully you guys have found utility from this podcast. We really can't say enough. Like the whole like setting up your diet, it's not something we do just to, I don't know, like sometimes things can be a bit wordy, like this outro here, a bit long and just to split hairs for the sake of splitting hairs. But this is one of those things where we seldomly take preps where someone's like, yo, like I want to prep in 20 weeks. Help me out. Like we almost have to completely rearrange those timelines. So if anything, we hope we got that message across, that setting up your prep properly is highly important.